Welcome to the Real Math of Business with Alena Bennett, where you plus this podcast equals better decisions. I'm Alena Bennett, speaker, author, and leadership expert. I work with chief executive officers and chief financial officers really to help them create universally investable companies where people serve people and the maths just works. This week, I'm talking to Daniel Munk, CEO of Wests Illawarra. But first, here is what I'm noticing at the moment, or what we like to call the WINATM, to help you win at the moment. So what I'm noticing at the moment, and it's really aligned with the conversation actually that I'm about to have with Danny, but I'm really noticing that people, leaders, staff, boards are loving honesty. And I know that it sounds a little bit silly, it sounds a little bit stupid because, as they say, honesty is the best policy. But I'm really seeing people openly appreciate when people demonstrate the real basic values of being a good human. And it kind of got me thinking, why has common sense leadership become so attractive or so uncommon that people are resonating so openly with it? I think about some of the conversations I've had recently, working with one CFO, and I had a conversation with him and his CEO recently. And, we have these three-way conversations fairly regularly when I work with organizations. And the CEO was talking about the CFO, but one of the things, in a really positive way, but one of the things that really, I guess I could tell the CEO was quite passionate about, almost to the point of emotive, was when he said, my CFO came to me with some real feedback, some real honest feedback. And I thought, well, I didn't look like this, but I was sitting in the back of my mind going, well, I think we just call that a business relationship. That was what was going on in the back of my mind. And he said, I really just valued his honesty and that he felt he could come to me with this feedback. He said, because no one else does. And so he said, if I'm just going about my merry way and everyone's just saying, you're amazing, you're doing a great job, or just being silent, how do I get better? And so, I kind of go, wow, I'm hearing a CEO emphatically be grateful for receiving feedback from one of his direct reports. I mean, that should just be status quo. I see this admiration for realness or common sense leadership all the time with executive teams I work with. When things go wrong and I see these executive teams lean into and have honest and frank conversations with their CEO and board, and it not end in a shouting match. And then when I sit back with them individually afterward and they just say, God, I thought that was going to go so differently. And they express such gratitude for the humanness through which that conversation was had. And then on the other side, I hear stories from executives where they're constantly, they're sitting there at their desk in their office questioning the motives and decisions of their peers and their leaders when they're trying to figure out, how do I dress up bad news? Or, how do I need to present myself so that, my boss thinks I'm credible? And I just go, gosh, what's going on with the world where there's this population that's struggling and wasting a bunch of time and energy going, what are they thinking? What do I have to say? What does it really mean? Thinking about those hidden agendas. And then there's this other pool of people who are just so openly expressing gratitude for just basic honesty and human values of integrity and respect. And I guess it's just got me questioning, why does that resonate so much? Why is simplicity so powerful? And so I think the thought-provoking question I would love, or TPQ I'd love to leave you with today is, how did common sense and good humanity become so refreshing? Where did we go wrong? Where common sense and good humanity has become new, it's become refreshing. Where did we go wrong, and what do we need to do to get back there? I'd love for you to think about where you're at on that spectrum, and what do you find refreshing? And how if you're not at the right end of the spectrum, how do you get back there? Would love to hear your thoughts. And now over to our chat with Danny Munk. Well, it is such a pleasure for me to welcome Danny Munk to the Real Math of Business with Alena Bennett podcast. Danny, we talked a little bit before we went live today. You know, when I thought about launching this podcast, you were one of the first people that I wanted to have, because one of the things I have admired, respected, and has really connected me, I think, with you professionally and personally, is your views around what success looks like. And we've talked a lot about this relationship between people and profit, and certainly that's been a thread through your career. So welcome, Danny. Wonderful to have you here.
Thanks, Alena. It's really appreciated, and thank you for being patient.
My pleasure. Now, Danny, I'm going to start really broad, and what we'll do is we'll just sort of navigate the conversation naturally. I'd really just love to know, you've had a really diverse experience over the course of your career, and you know you're a brilliant storyteller. In fact, I would say you are the chief storyteller of your business. I think that's a mantle that you like to wear as well. What I would love to know is just get your perspective on what the real math of business looks like, sounds like, or is to you.
Look, we all start the journey by getting taught numbers and getting taught principles. And like a lot of people, you know, there were certain decisions I made at the beginning of my journey and ended up with accounting, didn't complete it, moved to economics and finance, but it was still all numbers. The reality is, as the more and more you get into it, it's actually people. Numbers are important, transactions are important, governance, compliance, etc., all important. But if you don't have the people, if you don't have the energy, if you don't have, and you know, stealing from the castle of the vibe, it's not going to work, because you can have all the numbers that you like. The problem is that all you end up is with numbers. In our business and with our people, it really is about making sure that there's energy in the business to handle anything that comes up. Because anyone who truly believes that they know everything that's coming, knowing every action that's going to come, knowing every variation, they're already in trouble. And the thing is, if you also think that you know the answers, if you are the leader, then you also don't know what's coming. The fact is, you can hold the chair, but you're actually a guide. You know, the more that time you spend in the chair at the front of the bus, the more you realise that it's the people around you that get things done. It's the people around you that achieve the outcomes. It's the people around you that keep you energised. And you're making sure the road is clear, you're able to adapt to detours, you're able to talk to the right people. But if you haven't got the people right, you're already in trouble. So, you know, for me, the real math of business is how you deal with the people journey. And the numbers support that journey, but they aren't the journey. And, you know, what you alluded to before, our mantra is, and this is a mantra that's evolved over time, it's people before profit, but profit for people, with the brackets that people are our staff, our stakeholders, our community. Everything else is non-existent. And yes, people go, oh, but you've got to invest in the building, you've got to invest in this, and you've got to invest in that. That's the bitses. If you don't have the people right, if you don't have the energy, and in our business, which is a hospitality business, if you don't have the energy from the front door to the back door, if they don't believe in your values, if they can't tell the story, the dollars don't make anything, because dollars are short term. And as we've seen, you know, there's a lot of people in the world who are fixated by people who make money, but they don't have values. And, you know, there's a number of people in the world who make a lot of money that I would say in many ways have become the pictures of the old fascism, because they believe their money gives them the right to tell you how to live your life. Well, no. The true maths of business is giving people the opportunity to live their life in a unique way to make a difference for others. I guess that's a bit of a longer answer. But if you, at the end of the day, and more and more, I spend less time talking about numbers and more time talking about outcomes of people.
Oh, it's brilliant. And I've just taken a copious amounts of notes, and I'd like to come back to different elements of it. But perhaps if what I can just ask before we go into some of those elements, could you give us a brief overview of your career history to date? And maybe through the lens of all of those concepts you've just shared, if you wouldn't mind, to the extent you feel comfortable sharing over that journey, how you've seen that play out well or perhaps not so well.
I never intended to be in this industry. I thought I'd actually end up in the military. So I actually had a scholarship from Duntroon. Unfortunately, it turns out if you, for some reason or other, discover that you're allergic to penicillin, and I got glandular fever, and it turns out that when you have glandular fever, you can't take penicillin. So I reacted to it, and the military went, that's a problem. So suddenly I was doing engineering at Sydney University, which was exciting, except for the fact that all the pretty girls were going to the arts faculty. So engineering didn't end up that exciting. So I started getting involved in the club industry in '75. Enjoyed working in it, enjoyed working in pubs. Spent a bit of time in the ATO where I started doing accounting. Um, it really wasn't me. There wasn't enough energy in it. I mean, I'm not saying the public service is not a good role, but it wasn't that I didn't really fit that well in that structure. They gave me the opportunity to lead into accounting, and then through that at Macquarie, I moved into business through economics and finance. But really, the club industry got my attention and energy. I started working at Parramatta Leagues in a more structured way, ended up in their food and beverage area, running their catering, involved in setting up Parramatta Stadium. Certainly got more involved in the industry and the education side of the industry, which I became quite passionate about. Spent a bit of time at Epping RSL where I did HR, which I also enjoyed. But luckily enough, through that journey, at the end of '88, got a role as a GM at Guildford Leagues, which was my first major experience in that. And I had a good fellow by the name of Ken Hurst as our chairman. He was a great mentor because the reality was I genuinely had no idea what being a CEO was. I thought I did. I was very soon convinced I had no idea. And what I found was I was spending more time interacting with people and getting the best out of people than really looking at my dollars. You had your accounting team, you had your plans and your focus, but if you couldn't get the people on board, nothing mattered. And that was one of the journeys that I started learning at Guildford, and certainly understanding how you impacted what happened. That journey really enhanced in the beginning of '95 when I went to Balmain as their CEO, and within a very short time, because what happened at Super League, Keith Barnes, who was a legend in the sporting world, Keith was the GM of the football, but he wanted to focus more on the operations because of all the politics with Super League. I suddenly found myself CEO of football club and CEO of Leagues Club. And luckily, I had Neil Whittaker as the chairman, who was also head of sales at Boral. He actually played at Balmain, highly educated and quite a strategist. He was a great mentor. Then, following on from him, because he went to run the NRL, John Chalk. And Chalky talked about being just a local plumber, ran the business, as the guy, who ran the paper boy. Well, the thing that Chalky didn't say was he was also the plumbing business that did Silverwater Prison and Circular Quay and yeah, right. So Chalky was the guy who could talk to the Garbo and the Prime Minister in the same breath, right? Learn a lot from Chalky. John was a very good man. Through John, Dawn Fraser got on the board. We had a very interesting mix of people. Alex Hamill, George Patz, Robert Goley from Manchester Unity. You know, we had a lot of individuals on our board. Murray Symes, who was vice president at Citibank, I started to get a lot of influences from a lot of people. And it was interestingly, yes, you had to talk numbers, you had to talk outcomes, but you spent a lot of time talking about the people in the business, people outside the business, and how you also attracted people. So one of the things at Balmain was that we started looking at why things were happening in certain ways and, spending all this time and spending all this energy, but sometimes we were losing good people. And that's when I started spending more time, and luckily I was being influenced by my operations manager, who's probably started the journey sooner. He had seen Roma Gasta, who was very much in the human synergistic space, talking about values, culture, and outcomes. And that journey showed me that one of the biggest issues we had in the business was me. I was impacting the business in a way that was not constructive. I had to actually spend some time understanding how I impacted and what those impacts created. And just as much as you can be a force for good, you can also be quite negative if you're not watching what you're doing. And Roma has become a long-term mentor of mine, and she's a huge influence. And really, the mantra of values impact leadership, leadership impact culture, culture impacts the outcome sounds simplistic, but it's so true. And the more that you focus on that and the more that you look at what you're doing, you have to spend time as really enunciating what your values are and what you want to be. And, I enjoy being in a business that impacts its local communities, is part of the essence of those communities, and allows people to be unique in what they do. The world of cookie cutter is wrong. You can't get everyone to do the same thing. Yes, you can manufacture things exactly the same, but not people. And there's too many parts of the world at the moment that are trying to get people to mimic each other. Well, I'm sorry, but that's not how we are. We're in a lot of uniqueness. And, the fact that some people make money doesn't mean that they actually know what should be going on. At the moment, the world is being influenced by a lot of wankers. And unfortunately, they, through social media, through influencers, people are saying, oh, they know. Well, they really don't. The fact that they've made money doesn't mean they're good people. It doesn't mean they have good values. And in our business, it is about what impacts the grassroots, what influences your local community, what's important to those local communities. And at the end of the day, if you've got someone who can't find a bed to sleep in, you've got issues in that community. And the fact that you've got people with lots of money not understanding that they should be investing those dollars to make sure everyone is experiencing things that they can experience means they don't have values. Just making wealth is not an outcome. So at the end of the day, a business that is only concentrating on wealth isn't focusing on what it should do. Now, this all sounds very simple and very touchy-feely, but the reality is this is a long game, not a short game. So you've got to use the dollars to build your infrastructure and focus on what you're doing, but you can't get excessively fixated on constantly talking about what we've delivered in dollars. So in our business, I've learnt to only talk about EBITDA. Why? Because non-for-profit, cash is king. Talking about profit in a non-profit doesn't make sense. You've got to make profit to get outcomes, but you can't just focus on that. For example, in this year's budget, we've spoken to the board about not necessarily delivering the EBITDA that traditionally we do, because with what's happening outside the world at the moment, high interest rates, high runner costs, etc., if we were to achieve EBIT, I would actually have to let people go, which will actually impact the business. Things turn around, things change. Nothing is ever the same. So you've got to be sometimes willing to take less to make sure that you're there for tomorrow. And luckily, I work with a board that understands the values of our business. And it's also about making sure that the people that you've got understand that journey as well.
So I'm now going, where do I go next? Because there's so much in what you said. I want to just maybe point out, thank you for sharing your career journey, because even though as much as we've talked, it's very useful to kind of look at it chronologically. I don't think we've had that conversation before. One of the things that I can't help but wonder, I mean, everything that you've said is wonderful, right? And there's a part of, there could be a lens that we could listen, someone could listen to this conversation and go, oh, that sounds all touchy feely, which you and I both know you are not touchy feely. And so that's actually not your intention. Um, but there is a sense of real confidence and conviction when you talk this way. And what I know from knowing you for 5 years now, I think we've known each other, is you walk the talk. You are probably one of the most values driven person that I know. And what I mean by that is you not only say the values, like you live and breathe the values. We experience them every time, right? And we know that that's easier said than done. Um, so there's a part of me that wonders, are you able to have this perspective around people over profit and profit for people? And are you able to more confidently lean into the people side because you actually have a background of finance? And I guess maybe I'll reverse that by saying, do people get a bit obsessive about the numbers because they don't have that understanding?
Look, after Balmain, I went to Panthers for 3 years and controlled the 14 sites. And that in itself was an interesting journey. And then I went to the dark side in consulting. And with what you're talking about, in consulting, you find that people bring you in for the numbers. Oh, something's not working. We need someone to get in there and really break this up and do this and show us this. And sometimes, have those difficult conversations, translation, take the crowd out and shoot them, right? The thing is, but you actually, one of the things that really impacted me during that whole journey was that if you're actually at a point in the business that you're getting rid of people, you've really made some horrible decisions. Because the thing is, unless you're in manufacturing where you want to make boxes, everything to do with people, and whether it's hospitality, whether it's a business that has front-facing, etc., they are the representation of your business. They are the energy that attracts others. So what happens when people get fixated on numbers? And look, are people in accounts and finance managers and CFOs important? Absolutely. The thing is, but if they are the prime decision makers and they are thinking of it with the finance lens only, God help you. Because the problem is they are part of it. And the biggest issue that you try to do with anyone in the organisation is there are times to look inwards, which you need to. Everyone has to do that occasionally. But the thing is, if you're part of that leadership group in a business, you've got to look further out. And it's great to have a finance person who understands the governance, the compliance, where your numbers are tomorrow. Because, of course, CEOs are very good at spending money. So somebody's got to be sitting there going, might have to pay that one day. But they also need to be understanding what the business is about, why you are spending the money, what's more important. 2 more bricks or actually developing and training your people for tomorrow? Are we prepared to take risks in training the people, understanding we may lose some because we won't be able to give them all the opportunities? The fact that you can't keep everyone isn't a risk. The biggest risk is if you keep people from the wrong reason, which I refer to the cockroach effect, because cockroaches survive holocausts, right? They are staying there. Well, you don't want the cockroaches. You want the cockroaches to leave, but it does mean occasionally you're investing in people that will get to a certain point and say, we love you, but there's an opportunity I can take tomorrow. Well, so be it, because that keeps the energy going in the business. In our business, it's about not only people coming in and being met, but it's how we impact the community, how we sell the story. And as you know, in our journey, our CFO, who is an individual who's got great empathy, the party trick was to get her using that empathy in another role. And now she owns and sells our community strong journey. She is our storyteller in the community. Why? Because it allows her to look at where the business goes in a whole different way, appreciating if we are doing this, this is the outcome. So even the people who are generating our dollars within the different parts of our business, part of their role is to get out and see the impact, whether it's training stuff, whether it's evolving stuff, whether it's growing stuff. And the thing is, one of your biggest risks is if you get so fixated on the numbers, you forget why you exist. And the thing is, yes, you've got, look, do I ignore the numbers? No. Do I irritate my team because I don't get into the detail? Absolutely, but that's their role. You know, one of the things that I have to do, but is have an understanding of the picture. So I do listen to my people, but it's all about the moving parts. I'm not going to spend every day going, oh, we did this, or we got this, oh, we've only got $2 today. Look, do I watch where the revenues go and that? Sure. But that's all about understanding where we are, where we sit, and so on. But am I going to go into the intimacy every 24 hours? No. And if you are, then you're not thinking about where you're going. That's a bit like being in a car and looking at your iPhone watching a TV program instead of looking at the road, which unfortunately a lot of idiots do, and then they end up crashing, which is probably a good example, really. You know, that person is too busy worrying about their text message or their social media and they are driving. They're not looking at where they're going. They deserve what they get. So the person who's just looking at numbers all the time instead of thinking about where they're going, get what they deserve. And look, it's not that simple, and I understand that. I'm not being naive. Being in front of the bus means you've got to have your head in a whole lot of spaces, right? There's a lot of noise going around, right? But the people around you help you diminish the noise. And when you talk about values, if you say to people, we believe that we have a business that will give people balance, you've got to be prepared to accept that everyone has a different balance. You've also got to accept that things happen in people's lives that as a business you've got to adapt to. They don't need to adapt to you. I mean, the classic is if someone wants to have a family, well, bless their cotton socks. And if sometimes them having a family means that they can't focus on work, adapt. That's what you're supposed to do. And if that person's family has 4 legs versus 2, so be it. Because as a business, if you're not prepared to even adapt in simple, natural things like people having families or people's families needing support, you got the wrong leadership. Because if it's a long game, you've got to be able to adapt. And you don't only offer that to the person around you, you offer that all the way through the business. And that's where you start looking at what the businesses can do. You know, people say domestic violence is terrible. It is. But as a business, it shouldn't be something that you advertise that you support. All your people should know that if there's an issue with anyone in your business, they can come to you and get your support because you will help. The problem is too many businesses now are talking, oh, well, we'll support this and support that, because that's now a trend. Stuff like supporting people in their life isn't a trend, it's a value. And look, the more I've stayed in these businesses, and look, I'm pretty much the dinosaur generation, right? The more and more I've stayed in this business, the more I believe that what I invest in people will be the legacy that I leave behind versus the buildings that I've built. And even though there are smarter people, and look, some of the ones around me are far smarter. And yeah, we've talked about it, but they think quickly, they're in tune with things. And they've got this energy and they're picking things up. I think it's great. And part of my role now is not to get in their way, but allow them to experience these things. And only if I see them heading to a brick wall do I suggest a little bit of movement. But I'm enjoying how they're thinking and what they're doing and what they're absorbing. And so I really focus now on a business that allows people to develop their own uniqueness and allow those uniqueness to work together to have different people impacting each other. Who wants a business of cookie cutters? And out of that, in certainly what we do, we're growing something to make sure that that community business is not there for the next 5 years or the next 10. It's there for the next 50 to 100. And it will be able to evolve because we are using numbers to look at opportunities outside our business to be able to support our business.
One of the words you've used a lot today, Danny, is the word important. And you've said many things are important. Yeah. In fact, you opened up by saying numbers and transactions are important. You've also talked a lot about energy, values, storytelling. You've talked about the front door to the back door when people walk into the club all the way back, to the back of the club. There's a lot going on, and then you referenced the noise. But you keep coming back to, outcome. What you just said, this is about outcomes, and it's not even about 5-year outcomes. It's about 50, 100-year outcomes, right? It's that real longevity and playing the long game, not the short game. There might be some people that are listening to this saying, God, I would love to have the luxury of thinking about the long game because I am also a purpose-driven leader, but I feel the pressure of the people and the numbers that are kind of surrounding me. What advice would you have if someone was thinking that, listening to everything that you're saying, going, I want that, I want to be playing the long game, I want to be making sure that my business is sustainable, but I feel like I can't. What would your advice to them be?
My first thing would be, are you taking enough time to give yourself a moment to truly think? Not work on the business, not be in the business, but I refer to it as having time during the week to smell the hummus. Just ease back and not try and solve what your budget is, not try and but think, where are we going? Because the problem sometimes becomes when the numbers are what you're really focused on, you're looking at, can I cut this or can I do that? Or it's like moving levers. And look, there are times you've got to move the levers. I'm not saying not. But you've got to ask yourself, why am I moving the levers and what's going to be the longer outcome? Because the problem is sometimes when you're moving levers, you're actually putting yourself further in the hole than actually taking yourself out of the hole. So you've got to have time, and whether that's you're going for a walk and, you're looking at the world, or in my case, finding a nice cafe, enjoying a cup of coffee, sticking the headphones on, not talking to anyone and just thinking. Admittedly, I do most of my thinking after sitting on a motorbike because it's cleared my head out and I'm not worrying about anything, because if you worry about anything, the bitumen really hurts when you meet it. You've got to find something that allows you to free up your head. And you've got to be prepared to think out of the box. Because if your only solution is levers, you're already in trouble. Yes, I'm not saying you won't use levers, and there's cost changes, there's minimum wage changes, there's superannuation changes, there's power changes, there are insurance changes. The RBA makes decisions that you scratch your head. The federal government makes decisions that, you're convinced they are idiots. And, Chalmers isn't charming, by the way. And, you have the state government that has to pay bills and they have to raise taxes and all the rest of it. And look, the federal and state governments, they are hard roles. They've got to think ahead for the future, but they've also got to get re-elected. And unfortunately, we also have politics of negativity. So as a business, you got to deal with all that, but you've also got to not let it cripple you. And it doesn't matter what, the treasurer decides or what anyone else, what are you deciding? So I would say to anyone in business who was saying, look, how do we do what you do? Well, I'd probably not do what I do, but I'm happy to say to them, if you're prepared to think a little longer and do it initially in steps of, where do you want to have this business in 5 years? Where do you want to be in 5 years? Where do you want your people? That's the first step to thinking a little laterally. And how do you do those small chunks to make sure that you're actually putting that infrastructure in? In turn, certainly, and you talked about it before, it's the storytelling. How do you take, because unless you own the business, you've quite often got a board or someone you answer to. How do you sell them on this story? How do you get them to also sell the story? How do you get them to support the story? How do you get the people around you to believe it? And a lot of it is you have to live it. And we've talked about that before. There's none of this, oh, it's all for me and you get a little bit. CEO gets $10 million bonus, but he made 500 people redundant. Yeah, living your values there, dude. So you've got to balance this, right? You don't want to be the man that runs a big airline, say, for example, who gets lots of money from government, gives himself bonuses and buys nice places in the harbour, but is retrenching people. You can talk values and you can make pretty pictures and do all the rest, but if you don't live it, all that stuff is just artwork. At the end of the day, you've got to remember your title's irrelevant. You are part of the team. You have a role, and as a team, you've got to drive it. You're not entitled to anything more than anyone else. Yes, you might be getting paid more because, theoretically you've got the experiences, but you can't be dipping in the pond. And the thing is about living values, you've got to try and treat everyone on the journey in a constructive manner. You've got to look at how you bring the people along. And in some cases, you've got to spend more time developing them than developing yourself. Because if you've got people around you that are believing in the journey, believing in the values, driving the culture, the outcomes are amazing. And they're not always dollars. It's something as simple as people coming in and going, the person at the front was lovely. I had this issue and they looked after me. We solved this problem. We didn't have to ask you. We did this. We knew you'd be okay with it. It takes a while. For example, in this particular role, as you know, this is now I'm heading into year 11. It does not happen overnight. You can destroy a culture overnight, but you can't grow one overnight. You've got to be committed and you've got to be willing to take the journey.
Have you always felt this way? And I guess I'm asking that question with particular interest and curiosity around your experience, and you shared, the work that you did with Roma and how she was really pivotal in the moment where you realised, hey, the way I'm acting is not impacting the business in a positive way. Tell us a little bit about that.
I don't think I really understood the journey because I probably was classically trained. I mean, I worked in the ATO, I studied accounting, I studied economics, and I can't say I didn't suffer from the I know philosophy. I know what I'm doing. I know the answer. I know what I should be doing. I know what you should be doing. I know what the business should be doing. Mr. I know. It was humbling when you get feedback. That's not all negative, but when, say, for example, you look at, say, using the tool human synergistics, they break up the different styles, and blue is very constructive, green is more towards defensive avoidance, and red is power. So when I got my first review, I was thinking, it's got to be all blue and I'm this and I'm that, And look, lots of good comments, this, that, and the other. They ran out of red ink. And I was, what's happened here? What's going on? And it took quite a while in absorbing and talking with Roma and looking at the different styles and realising my intent might have been there, but the way, I was delivering, I wasn't giving people time to breathe. I wasn't giving people time to think. And there were little things that came about that I had to work on. For example, the white Earp effect, both guns on the side, someone comes up to you and you go, oh, I'm the boss, I've got to answer and solve it straight away. Reality is that's not what they wanted. In a lot of cases, they wanted me to listen. They wanted me to hear what they were doing, and in some cases, take my time before responding. So we suddenly, we started to create environments about, okay, are you after me to give you a solution or you want me to interact with you? The other thing that was coming out was, I had ideas. As I said, there's lots of noise. The problem was, quite often I'm talking about tomorrow and people are going, oh God, he wants me to do this today and he wants me to do this today. How am I going to do it all? Well, that's not what I wanted. So I had to learn how to enunciate my conversations, how to clarify my views, and more importantly, how to give people the space to do the things that they wanted to concentrate on. And that journey at Balmain, we didn't have a lot of people and, we weren't drowning in cash, but we did a lot of amazing things. And the more and more I've been on the journey, the more and more I understand that I have to constantly evolve because the people around me, depending on where I are, my brain's stopping, where I am, you've got to turn around and adapt. And even with the role that I've been doing at Wests, I've had to adapt because the people around me have influenced me. And that's the other thing you've got to remember. It doesn't matter how good you are on the journey and how far you are on the journey, the people around you will influence you, will help you adapt, and in turn they will widen your thoughts and adjust your thinking because they are also unique in their journey as well. So part of this is being prepared to actually listen to that other noise. Am I a different manager to when I started at West 10 years ago? Yes. Am I a better manager? Yeah, that's questionable. But, I've adjusted and adapted, and I'm hoping that I'm adjusting and adapting others. And if you are at a point where you're no longer doing that, get out of the business.
Danny, I reckon we got to book you in for another conversation because there is so much that I want to deep dive on this. I actually can't help but feel quite empowered by what you're saying. So you're saying a lot of good things, a lot of good concepts. As I said, there are a lot of things that you'd be saying that people would be very envious of. But what I am actually hearing from you is this is all around your journey has been heavily influenced by you taking ownership and responsibility for yourself, your actions, and your choices. Even what you've just said, my intent was there, but it wasn't landing that way. And so you needed to learn how to enunciate. You needed to learn. You didn't say these words, but you kind of had to learn to let go that you didn't need to have all the answers and you actually just kind of needed to pause and listen. That path is a choice you chose to go down. And it actually sounds quite freeing. It actually sounds like you chose to take that pressure off. So if I link it back to what you said around give yourself time to ease back, to free up your head. There's a lot, I can see how that all flows through.
Look, it's not as easy as it sounds because when the journey started, it'd be fair to say that I would get into the I'd micromanage. And letting go was terrifying because you actually had to trust people to the point that was your biggest risk. Not the dollars, people. And you had to be prepared that if things didn't work, you didn't turn around and go, you've done this. You had to be prepared to go, okay, we need to learn how to move forward. Because one of the other things you had to learn was the blame game doesn't solve anything. And I know, we have a running joke in the business. Danny doesn't look at detail. Well, it's taken me a long time not to look at detail and let go. Admittedly, I tend to look at things in detail, but I let others deal with the detail. not micromanaging is something that's a lot harder than it sounds, because you want to get involved, or there's something that you're really passionate about. You want to touch it and you want to play with it. Well, actually, you've got to let others do that. So it takes a lot, and you've also got to be prepared to get feedback and allow it to be, in some cases, be anonymous. Make sure it's honest, and even if it takes your breath away because you go, didn't realise I was impacting like that. You then got to think about how you change that. What tools do you need to use in the leadership journey to improve the way that you're working so your impact is more positive and the outcomes are better for everyone? And there are moments when you look in the mirror and you don't like it. And, there are even days now where I have to sit back and go, where am I? Look, there's one thing we haven't covered, and we talk about balance. I have a balance in the fact that I've been very fortunate to have a family life and a support team that gives me a lot of strength. I've never had to question where home is. I've never had to question about the support that I've had. I have a partner who's very successful on her own. I'm the handbag, she's the leader. But I've always had a cheer squad. And I've been very lucky that she's taken me on a journey with family. I'm probably not the most clucky individual you've ever met. But out of that journey, I've enjoyed family. I've got a son over in London, a daughter in Canberra, both lawyers. My wife's a lawyer. Tells you what they think of my career. But I've always had a home base. And you can't ignore that. And part of this journey, they talk about values, culture and balance. You've got to apply that at home. Because you can't be good at work and a shit at home. You've got to actually, and that was one thing I have to say, Roma really took me on a journey, and it had a huge impact. Balancing both. Being as good a leader at work as being a partner at home. It's interesting when you consider this year is 40 years, and that is honestly one of the stabilities in my life. So, you've got to think a little wider than just the job.
I absolutely agree with you. As we start to wrap up this conversation, I will come back to what I said before around, you probably are the most, or the person that demonstrates and lives and breathes and shows, like bleeds their values all over the place. And I think you've just articulated for us why you have that approach to life, because you've got that stability. And I appreciate that you sharing with us that is not something that just came naturally. It's not something that was easy. You actually needed to intentionally focus on. It was something that was made, Roma brought that awareness to you and you had to work on that. And I couldn't agree with you more. We are just one person. Right? Like we're talking about the real math of business as one unit that actually encompasses people and money. Well, we are just one person that encompasses personal and professional. But we're still just talking about the one human. And I really love that you've kind of grounded this whole conversation in that, because I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you so much for your generosity. As I said, we could unpack so much more of this throughout the whole day, but I'll just call out some of the things that I've just highlighted in my notes. You talked around the importance of having a mirror. And I think one of the things that, again, that's one of the things that I very much value and admire about you is, we'll have a session with your team, whether it's your board or your exec team. You'll call me up that night and say, how did I go? Do you have any feedback for me? What could I have done differently? And again, that having that feedback has been a part of your journey. But what I can tell you from my perspective, not every CEO does that. Yeah. You talked a lot. I'll come back to this idea of playing the long game. That is so hard to keep front of mind and for it really to drive your behaviours. But again, I see that. You talked at the very end. I love how you dropped the big truth bombs at the end. It's about trust. It's all about trust, because and why that's so important is you said actually, this is not just about you. You widen your thoughts and adjust your thinking because the people around you. So you have to trust and believe in those people around you because they ultimately influence you, how you lead, and how you're seen.
At the end of the day, if you're not going to trust the people around you, you've already selected the wrong people. And it doesn't matter if there's a risk associated. You've got to trust them. And I mean, it's amazing what comes out when you're prepared to absolutely trust. Trust and respect is the essence. And if you don't have either one, it's not working. And you're not entitled to, as a CEO, respect. You've got to earn it. You've got to earn the trust. You can give the respect and you can give the trust as a CEO, but as a CEO from your people, you have got to earn it. It's not given. And the thing is, I think too many people think when they get in the position of leadership, they're entitled to things. They're entitled to respect, they're entitled to trust, they're entitled to all the benefits. Well, you're not entitled to jack. And the thing is, the people around you will allow you to achieve it. And I'm a bit worried that the world is about, look at me, what I've earned. Look at me, what bonus I've got. Well, if that's what you're basing your success on, I feel for you. Yes, it's nice to earn good money. I'm not on the average wage. But if the dollars are the only answer you've got to measure how you're going, I think you've missed the point. And I think at the end of the day, to play the long game, you've got to take the people with you.
Danny, what a beautiful way to close. I just want to thank you so much for being so generous in sharing all the wisdom based on your experience. You know, I will close by just saying or playing back to you one of the things that you said, which is the title is irrelevant. You are just part of the team. And I think we are all just humans just trying to help and deliver good long-term outcomes. And you really exemplify that. And it's such a delight to have you here on this podcast. And I look forward to having you again very shortly. And what a great chat with Danny. That was so good. And that leads us right into our listener question. And don't forget, if you want to submit a listener question, you can leave a comment on YouTube or Spotify, and hopefully we'll get to it in a future episode. So today's listener question is quite pertinent, actually, given the conversation we've had. It's from Michael. So here we go. Hey, Alena, what was the moment you personally realised that the real math of business was more than just numbers? Whew. He says, thanks for the show so far. Loving it. Best, Michael. Well, Michael, thank you for not hiding behind the big question. That is the big question. And I'm going to do my best to answer it in the most succinct way possible, because I guess, you know, it's how do you synthesize my whole life experience? And yes, I think, you know, the real math of business as a concept is the culmination of my whole life. How do I synthesize that in a couple of minutes? Well, let me start by saying, you know, when I was choosing the degree I wanted to do at university, I wanted to be a sports physio. You know, I loved the Australian cricket team. I played, you know, elite netball. I really loved sports. So I went, I want to be a sports physio. And then I went, oh, I don't think I'm smart enough, so I'll just do commerce. So with all of the selections you have to do at university, number one was physio. There was only one university offering at the time. So physio at Sydney Uni, and then figuring that I wasn't actually smart enough to do it, all of the rest were commerce or commerce-related degrees. Somehow I got the mark to do physio, and I had a little bit of a freak out moment. Oh my goodness, I need to choose. I didn't think I'd have to make a choice. I'll go with commerce because it's the smart, conservative, general option. So that's how I fell, I guess, into the world of numbers. I have not come from an entrepreneurial or specifically business-based background. In fact, my dad was a doctor in the Navy. So, I was a Navy brat. My mum is from Tonga. So, obviously a really, raised in a really strong cultural, Pacific Island cultural background. So that's where I say kind of when I think about the real math of business and what that really represents, which is the duality between people and money. I really think about the duality of my parents, of, the people and the culture, and then that more conservative, traditional upbringing that my dad had. But so, I did the commerce degree and, it wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. I got by. I went into, started my corporate career at KPMG, was there for a very long time. And obviously as an auditor, it was pretty much all about the numbers. There was a little business stuff as the methodology changed, but it was really just about the numbers and making sure the numbers were right. Where I started to get a passion for the people side was actually, through my work at KPMG, where I was able to become a national training instructor and then a sampling specialist of all things, and consult with engagement teams. So that was really my first, formal foray into education and consultancy or advisory. That's when I kind of went, hang on a second. I personally have a love of working with people and helping them make better business decisions or be better at business. Through that lens of people. And I think that's been my personal enjoyment and trajectory that I have had personally. But I think when I personally realized that the real math of business was more than just numbers, actually, now that you've put me on the spot, Michael, it was actually an experience I had at KPMG in San Francisco when, talk about it being a money game. When you're dealing with those big companies in the US listed on the, on the stock exchange, etc., on the NASDAQ. And one of the partners I worked for he's Irish. And so he had this Irish charm. And so he was fun and he was very people oriented. He, definitely was kind of that first boss that I really looked at and went, wow, he really is just trying to lift all of the people. But the way he would talk to and engage with our clients from a money perspective was really bang on. Like, it was second to none. And, he's absolutely taken that partnership in the US by storm even now. And so I think that was the moment when I went, hang on a second, money and people in business can coexist. And yes, there's the numbers element, which is super important, but actually I've seen proof for the first time that the people element is equally, if not more important. And so I think from that point on, and when I moved back to Sydney and I came back to the Sydney office at KPMG, and then I moved out into my corporate roles and then into my consulting businesses, I think that's just continued to be proven. And I think that's a function of the business landscape, and the leadership landscape has evolved over time. I think, this idea of businesses being purpose-led and having a commitment to the community, I think that has evolved naturally. But I think my realization was, that would be back in, 2008 at that stage. And that was where I sort of had a bias to working with those sorts of people that were able to balance or appreciate that business was more than just numbers. So I guess for me, Michael, I know that was a very long way of saying it, is I saw the proof. And I think what I am excited about and what gives me real hope and promise for the future from a business perspective, from a, sort of broader business perspective, is that I continue to see proof. It's not everywhere, of course, but I continue to see proof that the real math of business is that beautiful combination and interplay between people and numbers, or, people and, as we call it, math. So I hope that answers your question. Again, thank you for listening to The Real Math of Business with Alena Bennett. If you liked this episode, remember to subscribe for more content and to stay on top of the real math of business. I'm Alena Bennett. Thank you so much for listening.